Welcome back to Globewise Entertainment, the home of shocking cinema, forgotten classics, and the wildest stories Hollywood tried to hide. Today, we're diving deep into the blood-soaked world of exploitation cinema, where censorship met its match. These are the top 10 most brutal 80s exploitation films that got banned, movies so graphic, so intense, they pushed the limits of what audiences could handle and what governments would allow. From gore-soaked horror to twisted revenge tales, these films shocked the world, and in some places, they were never seen again. So grab your popcorn, if you dare, and stick around till the end, because you won't believe what made the top of this list. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, hit that subscribe button now, and tell us in the comments, which banned 80s exploitation movie shocked you the most? 1. Night of the Demon, 1980. In the dense shadows of the American wilderness, something unspeakable waited. Something feral, relentless, and dripping with rage. This wasn't just a campfire legend. This was Night of the Demon, 1980, one of the most shocking exploitation horrors ever filmed, and so brutal, it was banned in several countries. It begins like any other backwoods tale. A professor leads a group of students deep into the forest to investigate sightings of Bigfoot. But this isn't the friendly creature of folklore. Here, the legend takes a blood-soaked turn, as each camper faces a monstrous fate that feels ripped straight from a nightmare. Released in 1980, Night of the Demon quickly earned its place among the most controversial films of the decade. Because instead of suggesting the horror, it showed everything. From brutal attacks to disturbing mutilations, this film didn't hold back, not even for a second. One scene in particular, infamous among horror collectors, shows a biker suffering one of the most graphic on-screen deaths ever committed to film. It was so shocking that British censors completely banned the movie under the Video Nasties list, claiming it corrupted the public's moral sanity. But horror fans? They couldn't get enough. Bootleg VHS copies spread underground, turning Night of the Demon into a cult legend, a forbidden fruit for those who dared to watch. Behind the scenes, the film's low budget only made it more raw and disturbing. The shaky camera, the foggy woods, the primal screams, everything felt too real. It wasn't just a monster movie, it was a descent into human savagery wrapped in myth. And that's what made it unforgettable and dangerous. Even today, Night of the Demon stands as a reminder of the 1980s exploitation era, when filmmakers pushed boundaries far beyond Hollywood's comfort zone. It's not for the faint of heart, but for horror enthusiasts, it's a piece of cinematic rebellion. A film that asked, what if the real monsters aren't in the forest, but in us? You've just heard the terrifying story of Night of the Demon, 1980, one of the most brutal banned exploitation films of the 80s. 2. Maniac, 1980. The movie too disturbing for the 80s. In the dark underbelly of early 1980s New York, where neon lights flickered over decaying streets and danger lurked in every shadow, one film dared to look straight into the eyes of madness and never blinked. That film was Maniac, 1980. Directed by William Lustig, Maniac wasn't just a horror movie, it was a psychological descent into pure obsession. The story follows Frank Zito, played with haunting intensity by Joe Spinell, a lonely man tormented by childhood trauma and haunted memories of his abusive past. But what truly set Maniac apart wasn't the violence, it was how real it all felt. The movie's gritty, documentary-style cinematography made the streets of New York feel alive and terrifying. Audiences weren't prepared for what they saw. Some walked out. Others demanded the film be banned. And in several countries, including the UK, Germany, and Australia, Maniac was immediately pulled from theaters and labeled as video nasty. Even critics couldn't handle it. Famous reviewer Gene Siskel publicly condemned the movie, calling it worthless exploitation. But horror fans? They saw something different, a mirror reflecting society's darkest fears and mental scars. Behind the scenes, Joe Spinell poured his own pain into the role. He wrote much of the film himself, channeling his loneliness and struggles into a character that felt terrifyingly human. It wasn't about monsters or masked killers. It was about the monster inside. Years later, Maniac would become a cult classic, a film studied by directors like Quentin Tarantino and Nicholas Winding Refn for its raw emotion and psychological depth. It's brutal. It's disturbing. But it's also unforgettable. In an era of flashy horror and slasher icons, Maniac dared to tell the story of real evil, the kind that hides behind a human face. They banned it to protect audiences. But in doing so, they only made it more legendary. Maniac, the film that blurred the line between horror and heartbreak. 3. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. In 1980, Italian director Ruggero Deodato released a film that would shock the world, terrify censors, and change cinema forever. That film was Cannibal Holocaust, a movie so graphic, so disturbingly realistic, that its director was actually arrested and accused of murder. This was no ordinary horror movie. Deodato wanted audiences to believe they were watching real lost footage, the story of a documentary crew who disappeared deep in the Amazon rainforest, only for their recovered film reels to reveal the horrifying truth of what happened to them. But what made it truly infamous wasn't just the brutal imagery. It was how real it all looked. When Cannibal Holocaust premiered in Italy, people fled theaters. Censors demanded it be banned immediately. Newspapers called it the most disturbing movie ever made. And within days, police confiscated all prints of the film and arrested Deodato himself. Because authorities were convinced that the deaths shown on screen were real. They believed Deodato had made a snuff film. To prove his innocence, the director had to bring the actors to court, alive and well, just to show that no one had actually been killed. But even then, the movie faced bans across the world, in over 50 countries, including the UK, Australia, and much of Europe. Even today, Cannibal Holocaust divides critics and audiences. Some call it a masterpiece of found footage horror, decades ahead of its time. Others see it as one of the most controversial exploitation films ever created, infamous for its extreme violence and its commentary on human savagery. Behind the gore and shock, Deodato claimed he was holding up a mirror, showing that civilized society could be just as cruel as the so-called savages they exploit for entertainment. But the message was lost amid the outrage, and the film became a dark legend of the 1980s underground scene. Whether you see it as art or obscenity, one thing is certain: Cannibal Holocaust remains one of the most banned, debated, and unforgettable exploitation films in movie history. It's the movie that blurred the line between fiction and reality, and forced the world to ask, how far is too far in the name of cinema? For Savage Streets, 1984. The year was 1984, neon lights, leather jackets, and vengeance-fueled cinema. But among the wild excess of 80s exploitation films, one movie crossed a line so bold, it became legendary. That movie was Savage Streets. At its core, Savage Streets tells the story of Brenda, played by the unstoppable Linda Blair, yes, the same girl from The Exorcist, but this time, she's not possessed by a demon, she's possessed by revenge. After her mute sister is brutally attacked by a vicious gang, Brenda drops her cheerleader smile and picks up a crossbow, turning the streets of Los Angeles into her personal war zone. But what made Savage Streets so shocking, even for its time, was its raw brutality and unapologetic revenge fantasy. It wasn't just violent, it was personal. The film pushed boundaries of sexual violence, street justice, and female rage that censors in several countries just couldn't handle. In the UK, it was slapped with a video nasty label, effectively banned for years. In Australia and Canada, it was heavily censored or outright blocked from release. Critics called it excessive, disturbing, and too exploitative. But despite the bans, Savage Streets gained a cult following. Fans saw it not just as sleaze, but as a gritty symbol of empowerment, a woman taking back control in a world that wronged her. With its over-the-top 80s soundtrack, leather-clad vigilantes, and unapologetic justice, Savage Streets remains a controversial classic, one that dared to scream, "Don't mess with Brenda." Even decades later, Savage Streets stands as a brutal reminder of just how far the 80s exploitation era was willing to go, and why so many of its films were banned, but never forgotten. 5. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. Deep in the dense jungles of the Amazon, where civilization fades into primal chaos, one film dared to go too far and paid the ultimate price. Released in 1981, Cannibal Ferox, also known internationally as Make Them Die Slowly, was director Umberto Lenzi's savage answer to Cannibal Holocaust. But where its predecessor shocked the world, this one pushed the boundaries of human endurance. Promoted as the most violent film ever made, Cannibal Ferox promised to outdo every gorefest before it, and it delivered in ways that even its own creators came to regret. The movie follows 3 New York students who venture deep into the Amazon to prove that cannibalism is just a myth. But soon, they discover that some legends are terrifyingly real. What begins as an adventure turns into a descent into madness, torture, and revenge. With its shocking mix of graphic violence, torture scenes, and real animal cruelty, Cannibal Ferox became one of the most banned films in cinematic history, prohibited in over a dozen countries, including the UK, Australia, and Germany. Censors called it obscene, sadistic, and morally repulsive. Audiences fainted, critics condemned it, and yet, underground video shops couldn't keep copies on their shelves. It became a cult legend, whispered among horror fans as the forbidden film you weren't supposed to see. Despite the backlash, Cannibal Ferox stood as a brutal reminder of how far the exploitation era would go to shock and provoke. It was banned for over 2 decades, but in the age of uncut streaming and restored Blu-rays, it's found a new audience, one still fascinated by its raw, disturbing power. Was it art? Or just pure exploitation? That question still divides horror fans to this day. In the wild world of banned 80s exploitation cinema, Cannibal Ferox remains a brutal relic of an era that dared to show the unshowable. But if you thought Cannibal Ferox was the peak of shock cinema, wait till you see what came next. 6. The New York Ripper, 1982. In the grimy underbelly of 1980s New York City, a place pulsing with danger, decay, and desperation, came a film so shocking, so viciously raw, that it became one of the most infamous exploitation films ever made. This was Lucio Fulci's The New York Ripper, 1982, a crime horror thriller that pushed the limits of violence and morality until the censors slammed the brakes. The story follows a hard-edged detective hunting a sadistic killer who stalks and murders women across the city. But this wasn't your typical slasher. Fulci's vision turned New York itself into a living nightmare, a filthy, chaotic jungle where brutality lurks behind every shadow. What made The New York Ripper so notorious wasn't just its graphic violence, it was how it portrayed it. The killer's disturbing duck-like voice, the voyeuristic camera work, and the unflinching close-ups left audiences disturbed, not entertained. When the film was submitted to the British Board of Film Classification, the response was immediate: rejection. In fact, the censor reportedly called the film disgusting, degrading, and nihilistic. It was banned outright in the UK, Australia, and several European countries for over a decade. Even in the United States, it was heavily cut for release, with many theaters refusing to screen it at all. Yet, decades later, The New York Ripper has gained a strange cult status. Some see it as Fulci's twisted commentary on urban decay, a mirror reflecting the dark soul of a collapsing city. Others still call it one of the most exploitative films ever made. Either way, its legacy remains unshakable. A disturbing time capsule of 1980s cinema, where art, fear, and controversy collided head-on. If you think modern horror pushes boundaries, The New York Ripper reminds us the 80s did it first and maybe did it harder. Don't go anywhere. The next film will take the madness even further. 7. Necromantic, 1987. The late 1980s saw horror filmmakers push boundaries like never before, but one German film didn't just push the line, it obliterated it. Enter Necromantic, the 1987 underground shocker that became one of the most infamous banned films in cinematic history. Directed by Jörg Buttgereit, Necromantic wasn't a Hollywood horror flick. It was a German art house nightmare made on a shoestring budget, shot on gritty 16mm film. The story follows Rob Schmadtke, a man who works for a cleanup crew that removes dead bodies from accident scenes. But when his morbid fascination with death turns into obsession, his life spirals into a disturbing fantasy world, one that critics labeled too shocking for human eyes. When Necromantic premiered, it caused an uproar. Censors in Germany, Australia, and the UK immediately banned the film, calling it a disgrace to cinema. Even underground theaters were raided for showing it. Yet, despite the outrage, or maybe because of it, Necromantic developed a cult following among hardcore horror fans. Collectors would pay hundreds for rare VHS copies, and bootleg versions spread across Europe like wildfire. Decades later, Necromantic is viewed not just as exploitation, but as a grim reflection of death, loneliness, and human obsession. Beneath its shock value lies a chilling metaphor. What happens when love, loss, and madness become one? Even today, streaming platforms avoid it. But its name continues to echo through horror history, a reminder that some films go too far, and somehow, that's exactly why they're remembered. Would you dare to watch Necromantic, or is this one better left buried in the vault of banned cinema? 8. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. The film too real for the world. In 1988, Hong Kong audiences were stunned, and many left theaters in silence. Men Behind the Sun, directed by T.F. Mao, wasn't just another war film, it was a horrifying descent into the darkest chapter of human cruelty. Set during World War II, the movie depicts the real-life atrocities committed by Japan's notorious Unit 731, a secret biological warfare research unit responsible for unimaginable human experiments. But what made Men Behind the Sun so controversial wasn't just its story, it was how brutally real it looked. The film shows prisoners being subjected to vivisection, frostbite tests, and other unspeakable acts, all recreated with disturbing authenticity. Some scenes were so graphic that rumors spread that real autopsy footage had been used. T.F. Mao later confirmed that certain shots used real animal corpses, adding fuel to the controversy. When it premiered, audiences were divided. Some called it a bold historical warning, while others condemned it as exploitative and obscene. Censors in Australia, the UK, and even parts of Asia quickly banned it, labeling it as too disturbing for public viewing. But despite its bans, Men Behind the Sun found a cult following among horror and history enthusiasts. It's now regarded as one of the most haunting anti-war films ever made, a film that forces viewers to confront the horrors humanity is capable of when compassion dies. Whether you see it as a shocking exploitation film or a brutally honest depiction of history, one thing is certain: Men Behind the Sun isn't just a movie, it's an experience you can't unsee. 9. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. The film too real to be fiction. In 1986, a small independent film shocked even the toughest critics. A movie so disturbingly realistic that it blurred the line between cinema and confession. This was Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, a cold, unflinching descent into the mind of a man with no remorse and no moral compass. Directed by John McNaughton and based loosely on the true-life crimes of serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, this wasn't your typical slasher flick. There were no masked killers, no campy one-liners, and no escape for the audience. Just brutal, quiet evil, filmed with unsettling realism. What made Henry truly horrifying wasn't the blood, it was the calm. Henry kills without anger, without motive, and without fear. He's polite, even friendly, until he isn't. The film's raw documentary style made viewers feel like silent witnesses, trapped inside the killer's world, unable to look away. Shot on a shoestring budget and with a cast of unknowns, Henry was never meant to become infamous. But when censors got their hands on it, chaos followed. The MPA refused to give it an R rating, declaring it morally repugnant and lacking any redeeming value. Several countries, including the UK and Australia, banned or heavily censored it, calling it a threat to public decency. Ironically, that controversy turned Henry into a cult legend. Critics who dared to watch called it one of the most chilling portraits of human evil ever filmed. And Michael Rooker's breakout performance, cold, emotionless, unforgettable, turned him into one of the decade's most haunting on-screen villains. Today, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, stands as a warning, not about the monster under the bed, but the one sitting quietly beside you. A film that crossed the line and forced us to ask what happens when horror stops pretending. This was one of the most shocking stories behind a banned 80s exploitation film. If you love exploring controversial cinema and untold Hollywood tales, hit that subscribe button now and join Globewise Entertainment, where film history comes alive, one shocking story at a time. 10. Zombie 2, 1979/1980. Before The Walking Dead, before CGI gore and blockbuster zombie flicks, there was Zombie 2. A film so raw, so shockingly graphic, it made audiences physically sick and left censors trembling. Released in 1979 internationally and in 1980 in the US, Zombie 2 was Italy's brutal answer to George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Director Lucio Fulci didn't just want to imitate Romero's work, he wanted to outdo it in blood, horror, and shock value. And oh, he succeeded. Set on a cursed Caribbean island, Zombie 2 follows a group of people investigating a mysterious outbreak. What they find isn't just a plague, it's a nightmare crawling out of the grave. But what truly made Zombie 2 infamous wasn't just the story. It was the visuals, the eye-gouging scene, the underwater zombie versus shark fight, and the disturbingly realistic makeup effects that made the dead look terrifyingly alive. When Zombie 2 hit theaters, several countries immediately slapped bans on it, including the UK, where it was branded a video nasty. Censors cited extreme gore, sadistic realism, and public health concerns. Yes, people actually thought the effects looked too real. Even some theaters in the US refused to screen it, labeling it morbidly obscene. But the controversy only fueled the legend. Horror fans hunted down VHS copies in the underground market, making it one of the most bootlegged films of the 1980s. Today, Zombie 2 is considered a cult masterpiece of Italian horror, the film that turned Lucio Fulci into the godfather of gore. Its practical effects inspired generations of horror filmmakers, proving that sometimes what you don't censor becomes immortal. From eyeballs to sharks to The Walking Dead, Zombie 2 didn't just cross the line. It ate the line, buried it, and brought it back as a zombie. And there you have it, 10 of the most brutal, shocking, and unforgettable exploitation films of the 1980s that went so far, entire countries banned them. Whether it was the over-the-top violence, taboo-breaking stories, or pure cinematic chaos, these films proved one thing: the 80s had no limits. Some were condemned, others became cult legends, but all of them left their mark on movie history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the wild world of banned cinema, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Globewise Entertainment, where we uncover the untold stories, hidden gems, and shocking truths behind the movies you thought you knew. Tell us in the comments, which banned 80s exploitation film blew your mind the most? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time, only on Globewise Entertainment, where the reel never stops spinning.